So the challenge was, without the aid of any hard surface dynamics, put together an animation of a bullet smashing through a piece of glass. Now obviously it's never going to be as accurate as something calculated by a dynamics engine, but by using some interesting features in Modo, we're able to create something that's quite convincing. So this is the final animation. So the bullet comes through and hits the glass and carries on. Now there's three elements to this that are quite interesting. First of all, how we go about modelling the broken glass. Secondly, how we go about animating the shards of glass flying out. And thirdly, how we go about creating the shock wave as the glass is breaking. So let's start with the modelling. So if you open up the start scene, you'll find a scene with three mesh layers. We've got glass complete, which is just a single rectangular polygon, glass broken, which is a single rectangular polygon, and bullet, which is a very simple little sub-D model of a bullet. So we don't need to see glass complete, we're not going to touch that. We want to work on the broken glass. So select that and then go into the front view and zoom into the bullet. So what we need to do is draw out all of the fracture lines so that we can define each shard of glass as an individual polygon. And we can do that with edge slice. So run edge slice, and we'll start by just defining the hole that the bullet would go through. And then we can bring out some major fracture lines. And when you've done those, you can then start to define the individual shards of glass. Now the pieces of glass would be quite small around the bullet hole and then gradually get bigger the further out you go. So when you've done that, you should end up with something that looks like this. I mean, you could make it much more detailed if you wanted to, but importantly, make sure that the hole that you defined for the bullet is also broken down into individual pieces, and also that each major fracture line is also joined at the end to create separate polygons. Now these aren't going to be individual pieces of glass. Having it like this just allows us to define the geometry for the fracture line, but it will become more obvious why we've done that in a minute. So now we can extrude the glass to make it three-dimensional. Now that's pretty straightforward with the glass complete layer. So we can just run extrude, and we'll just extrude it by -3mm on the Z. But when it comes to the glass broken layer, we've got a problem, because we need each individual shard of glass to be in a separate mesh layer before we extrude it. Now what that means is we have to cut and paste each polygon into a separate layer, and that's going to take a long time. So what you need to do, like every good visual effects artist has to do, and that's write a script. Now unfortunately I don't know how to write scripts, but luckily I know a man who does. So our very own Gwynriddick has written me this script called polys to layers.py, it's a little Python script. So just place it in your scripts directory where your license file is. I'm just going to copy the name of that script. And what this script does is it takes a single mesh layer and it copies every single polygon out into its own individual layer. So I'm just in the command line, I'm just going to type @ and I'll paste that polys to layers.py in and hit return, and it should take about 20 seconds to run. So when that's finished running, you'll end up with a group in the item list, and inside that you'll have over 200 individual mesh layers, each containing a single polygon. So what we need to do now is shift select all of those layers, and in polygon mode hit the X key, click in the viewport, and we'll extrude it by -3mm on the Z. So if we go to item mode now, we can now select individual shards of glass. But we've got a problem in that these major fracture lines are also large individual pieces of glass, and we don't want that. We want them to just be fracture lines inside this larger area of glass. So what we need to do is remove some geometry. So with the large area of glass selected, go to polygon mode, and what we need to do is remove this internal row of polygons. So select two and hit the L key. Now at the moment this row of polygons is creating a fracture line in the glass, so if we remove it, we'll remove the fracture. So just hit delete. Now there's a corresponding row of polygons on the other side of the fracture line. So to get rid of those, we'll go into item mode, we'll select one of these larger pieces of glass, hold down shift, and we'll select all of those major fracture lines. We don't need the large area of glass. Then go back into polygon mode, and you just need to select the outside row of polygons. You can't use select loop on this. When you've done that, hit delete, and you can still see the fracture lines in there. So now we need to cut this, so Control X, back into item mode, we'll select the major piece of glass, go back into polygon mode, and Control V to paste. Now when you've done that, there's no need to join these polygons together. Because the glass is perfectly flat, those polygons will happily sit next to each other, and you won't see any disruption to the surface across the join. But you will end up with a number of empty mesh layers from the pieces that we cut out, so just select those and delete them. And that's the modelling done. Now before we can start animating the glass, we need to make sure that the centre of each item is centred on the geometry in each item. So in item mode, select each piece of glass, we'll come to item, centre to bounding box, and select centre. Okay, so I've set the timeline to 200 frames, and we'll start by keyframing the bullet. So select it. We'll key the Z positional channel, hit the Y key, and we'll move the bullet back. Then we'll go to frame 200, and we'll move the bullet through the glass. Then right click and open up the graph editor. Now we want the bullet to be at a constant velocity, so we need to set a pre-behavior of linear and also a post-behavior of linear. So next we need to find out at which frame the bullet hits the glass. So just scrub the timeline, and my bullet hits the glass at frame 74. So that's the frame at which you set the first keyframe for each shard of glass. So now we can select all the glass apart from the large area of glass, and we need to key all the position and rotational channels, and you can do that with Shift Y. So now we need to keyframe each piece of glass as it flies out. But don't worry, we're not going to do them individually. We're going to use a fall-off. So go to a front view, run a cylinder fall-off, drag it out into viewport. Now it'll drag out on the first selected item. We just need to move it so it's centered on the bullet. And this might be a little difficult for you to see. Now we don't want the hole to be too big, because bullet holes are quite small. And make sure that you've got the correct shape on the fall-off. We need it to be ease out, so that means there's going to be more movement in the middle. Okay, so go to frame 200, and this is the real cool bit. Hit the Y key, and then move it out on the Z, and the shards of glass will come out. And we want to move it so it's just trailing behind the bullet. Spacebar to drop the tool, and then escape to remove the fall-off. So like the bullet, we don't want any acceleration or deceleration with these pieces. So open up the graph editor. Now it's okay for the pieces just to continue flying off into the distance. So we can set a post behavior of linear. And when they initially break out, we don't want any acceleration, we just want them to start moving straight away. So select the keys at frame 74, right click and set them to linear. So now we can add a little bit more finesse to the animation. So let's scrub back, and the point at which the bullet breaks out, we need to select all of those pieces. So go to about frame 90, or maybe 85, and these would be pushed forward by the bullet. So with the Y key, I'm just going to move them forward, and then we can just move them over and maybe give them some rotation. So when you've done that, you also need to add a little bit of rotation to all of the other pieces. Now you can do this as a group, so just select a whole row like that, hit the Y key, and just give it some rotation on 2 axes is probably best, and then do this row, and so on. So if you shift select all of the pieces that are moving and then open up the graph editor, you'll notice that all of those channels have a linear post behavior, which means just by setting that small amount of rotation at that point, as you then scrub through the animation, those pieces will continue to slowly rotate. Okay, so with the animation done, let's set up a simple scene. I've set the camera up. I've also got 3 materials. I've got material for the bullet, a material for the complete sheet of glass, and a material for all the broken pieces of glass. So let's bring in a studio environment, a really simple environment, the all-white 01. I'll just double click on that. And go to materials, metal and lead, and we'll have a burnished lead for the bullet. And then we can create a very simple glass material. So I'll have 0 diffuse, 0 specularity, 7% reflection, 50% Fresnel, 100% transparency, a refractive index for flint glass, and we might want to make it slightly tinted. And then we can just copy that and paste that onto the broken glass material. So the final problem is how to create a shock wave as the fracture lines radiate out across the glass. Well, to achieve this, I've created 2 image sequences. This is the first one, it's called black dot. So this is the animation running, and we get to this point and we have a little black dot, and this is the point at which the bullet hits the glass. And that dot slowly gets bigger. So what I'm going to do is use this as a stencil map that's going to clip out that material. So the fracture lines are going to gradually be revealed. And the other image sequence is the inverse of it, so it's a white dot on a black background. And that's going to clip out the other material, the pristine glass, so that will gradually disappear. So let's load these image sequences in. So to add layer, and I'll load black dot into glass broken. Turn off anti-aliasing, go to texture locator, and we want to project it planar on the Z, and we want the horizontal and vertical repeat to be edge, and we want the effect to be stencil. And then we can load the other image sequence, the white dot sequence, into the glass complete. Do the same thing. And set the effect to stencil. Now if I take the animation back to frame 80, you'll be able to see a white line running around the center of the glass there. Now that's the border between the 2 clipped materials. Now to get rid of that, come to the white dot image sequence and to texture locator, and we just want to reduce the size of it, so those 2 edges are just going to overlap slightly. So we'll reduce this to 99 centimeters, and that line will disappear. So if I scrub through this, you can see the fracture lines growing at the point of impact. So there we go, script to help you model, fall-offs to help you animate, and a nice use of image sequences. How much more fun could you possibly have?